Hey everybody, welcome back. Just wanted to share some thoughts with you today about various food preservation techniques, and specifically talk about canning, and talk about some of the things that I've learned recently. So one thing that I think many people have a good understanding of is the need for preserving food. So historically people have preserved food through different means, smoking, drying, putting things in salt, and various other kinds of things. Obviously, you want to take the food that you have during harvest times and preserve it so that you have something to eat during the lean times, like in the winter when you might not have produce available, or really much of anything available. So that's basically the idea of why you have wanted to preserve food in the past. Now, why is canning still popular today? Well, there's a number of reasons, and some of the reasons why I do it myself personally is that you want to maximize the nutrient content of the food that you're eating, and the best way to do that is to obviously eat things when they're ripe in season. But now, take for example, something like peppers and tomatoes. You get like a huge bunch of them coming up during the peak harvest times, in end of summer, early fall, and then if you want like a good tasting tomato, you're not going to really get that in the winter time. Maybe through some import export from some far flung region of the world, you're going to get a tomato, but certainly not going to be the kind of tomato that you really want to eat, as far as the nutrient content goes. So what you can do is, if you're especially growing a lot of your own food, you always end up with more than you need at that moment that you can consume, so you can preserve that. And obviously by canning it while it's ripe, right at the end of the growing season, you're preserving the maximum amount of nutrition that's available for you in there. So that's one reason to do it. Another reason is obviously the convenience, so that something's already cooked. You just open the jar and you can serve that to your family, your friends, yourself, and that's a real convenience. So something's already cooked. Maybe you're just gonna boil some pasta, eat it with bread, put it next to something else that cooks quickly, like potatoes or rice, and you've got a ready-made meal. Quick stir fry, something like that, to go with it. And that's actually a great way to preserve fruit as well. So you get something for your breakfast, your jams, toast, whatever. So the convenience is definitely a factor, and then also cost. If you're canning your own food, it's going to be a lot cheaper than buying the store-bought equivalent. And then naturally taste as well. As I've mentioned before, I think you're going to end up with better tasting food. So those are the reasons why I personally am a big fan of canning. And along the cost kind of line of thinking, I also want to mention that in my mind you have the freezer option. A lot of people put away fresh fruit and veggies, and they freeze them. A lot of people you'll see will get a standalone freezer and put additional food in there above and beyond what they have in their fridge. And I think that's fine and great. And frozen food is definitely nutritious, and it's good. The only thing that I see fault there with is looking at it from like an environmental perspective. You're constantly using usually a fossil fuel energy source to run your refrigerator. Very few people are off grid or on solar or whatever, or totally independent, like on wind power. So yeah, I think if you look at something that's going to be cooked at some point anyway, like your zucchinis, your whatever, peppers, tomatoes, as I mentioned, then it's in my mind preferable to just cook that once, put it in the can, and preserve it without any additional energy requirements. You can just keep it in your pantry or your basement. So I think that's a nice thing to do as well. So anyway, I'm going to show you some of the stuff that I've canned. So first, let me just kind of quickly tell you what we've preserved so far. And there have been a few other things that have already been eaten, so it was a little bit more than this. I had a couple of strawberries that we did, strawberry jam. These are all the elderberry jams that we've put away. Eaten one of those already too. And then a lot of this, which is a Hungarian thing called lecho, which is I guess like I don't know if it's like I guess it's kind of like salsa. I think in the French it might be the ratatouille, which is like the little cartoon with the rat. But anyway, it's got like peppers and tomatoes and onions in there, so really good, tasty. You can use it as a base for all sorts of stuff, or just eat it with bread. Dump it on pasta, anything you really would eat, almost like a tomato based sauce with. And got quite a bunch of those. Those are all these. And then this is basically an eggplant salad that we've put away, which is basically just smoked, or not smoked, but just, I guess, grilled eggplant right on the fire. You just take the eggplant, just throw it right on the coals. They just cook up. Then you peel them. And then we basically put in some onion, salt, vinegar, and boiled that again, and then put it in the jars. I mentioned I did want to give you a little bit of the history of canning in general. So I'm going to actually show you some things online that I just recently started learning myself. And I think one interesting thing is that canning is not as old as I had thought. For some reason, in my mind, I thought it had been around for like hundreds and hundreds of years, and really it's a relatively recent invention. So it looks like basically Napoleon, when he was doing his series of wars, he was having trouble feeding his troops nutritious food, and he set out a prize that basically anybody who can invent a way to get food preserved that can be brought with the troops during the combat, that they would be awarded 12,000 francs. So this guy, Nicholas Appert, I don't know if I'm mispronouncing his name. Apologies for anybody who's French and watching. This guy in 1809, he was basically a brewer and confectioner, and he came up with this method of putting food and sealing them in glass jars, similar to what you see here. And sure enough, his idea worked, and he got the prize. And after that, basically, people kind of took over from there. They started putting the food in actual cans, like the tin cans and things like that. And then it, really grew from there. So, it's I say, relatively new invention in the way of food preservation when you're looking at the history of mankind, as far as like, salt preservation and mostly I think like smoking foods or things like that, or drying them. I think compared to that, this is a relatively new invention. So anyway, just wanted to share that, and then show you guys some of the different methods of canning. So, what I have found is that really there's kind of three main canning methodologies, and I was really only aware of one of these previous to my research. So I knew about the open kettle method, which I think is actually, it seems like quite the non-preferred method. It's the least foolproof way of canning your food. And what you do there is what you saw if you watched my video on how to put away elderberry jam. You basically just boil the food, and you take it right out of the boiling pot, and you put it into your sterilized jars. You seal them, and then you put them in a series of blankets to let them cool off gradually. And the gradual cooling creates the vacuum in the jar and makes the seal with the lids, so that the food is hopefully preserved for you. But unfortunately, if there's any kind of like bacteria, pathogens, or anything left over in the can or even in the air that you're closing the lid on top of, that can cause your food to spoil. So it's not a preferred method, and there's actually different methods, which I haven't tried yet, but I'm going to give them a shot probably, and maybe do another video on that later. So very briefly, one of them is called the boiling water method, and what it entails is you are basically taking your food, you're putting it in your jars, putting the lids on, and then you are putting it into a big pot of boiling water, and you ensure that the water covers the pots by at least like 2 inches, the glass jars, I should say, by 2 inches, and then you boil them for a certain amount of time, and ensure that everything is basically sterilized and cooked all the way through. And this covers the whole bottle, any of the air that might be inside, and what have you. So this is actually a pretty good method, and you can see the the jars under the water here boiling, and the whole contents of the entire pot are going to be sterilized with this method. Then you can take them out, you put them to the side, you let them cool. It'll, create the suction and, seal the lids, and that's it. So this seems like a pretty nice method, and this is used for any types of foods that are acidic, which usually most of your fruit preserves are going to be acidic, or anything like pickling, or that kind of thing, like usually like tomatoes too, or anything that you add vinegar to. That would also be fine to use this method for. Then if you have stuff that's not acidic, they recommend even higher temperatures to make sure that you kill anything that could cause the food to spoil. And for that you want a pressure cooker, because this will allow you to get higher temperatures than just the boiling method. So you have your pressure cooker. In both of these methods, you place the jars onto some kind of rack so they're not directly touching the either the pot or the pressure cooker. You can see the rack here in the bottom. You put in your jars, you seal it up, and I'll include both links that I'm showing here in the description below, so you can read them. This one in particular is actually very thorough and talks about the whole process, and highly recommend reading it. So here you can see that the set amount of time has gone by after the pressure has come up, and they take out the jars and put them to the side, and again you just wait until the seal is made on the lid, and you're done. So I hope that's helpful to somebody who hasn't done any canning before. I think some of this seems intimidating when you first start reading about it, especially the pressure canning method. There's a lot of prescribed time of how long, and what kind of pressure it has to be held at, and what kind of temperatures, and how much what they call is the headspace of how much air you have to leave above the food that you're putting away, and all this kind of stuff. So again, I think you can get into kind of paralysis by analysis. I recommend that you give it a shot. It's not that complex. You should really try it out. I really recommend it. And there is something really satisfying about opening up your own jar of canned food that you've put away, and eat some delicious tomatoes or peppers or whatever you've put away in the end of the summer, and eat that in the winter time, or your jams or jellies. And I definitely recommend it. So check it out. Check out the links that I'm going to include here if you want to read more. I definitely recommend that. And remember to be conscious and conscientious when choosing your next meal. Hope to see you again soon. Subscribe if you like this video, and share it with a friend. Thanks.